Book 2, Chapter 9 of British Goblins, Welsh Folklore, Fairy Mythology, Legends and Traditions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. British Goblins, Welsh Folklore, Fairy Mythology, Legends and Traditions by Wirt Sikes, Book 2. Chapter 9, Part 1. Perhaps the most picturesque of the several death omens popular in Wales is the Canol Corff, or corpse candle. It is also, according to my observation, the most extensively believed in at the present day. Its details are varied and extremely interesting. The idea of a goblin in the form of a lighted tallow candle is ludicrous enough at first sight, and indeed I know several learned Welsh gentlemen who ventured to laugh at it. But the superstition grows more and more grim and less risible the better one becomes acquainted with it. It is worth noting here that the canol or candle is a more poetic thing among the Welsh, has a higher literary place, so to speak, than among English-speaking peoples. In the works of their ancient poets the candle is mentioned in passages where we should use the word light or lamp, as in this verse, which is attributed to Aneurin, 6th century. The best candle for man is prudence. The candle is the favourite figure for mental guidance among the Welsh. There is no book in the Welsh language so popular as a certain work of religious counsel by a former vicar of Llandovery, called The Candle of the Cymry. The corpse candle is always and invariably a death warning. It sometimes appears as a stately flambeau, stalking along unsupported, burning with a ghastly blue flame. Sometimes it is a plain tallow dip, in the hand of a ghost, and when the ghost is seen distinctly, it is recognized as the ghost of some living person yet living, who will now soon die. This, it will be noticed, is a variation upon the wraith or lledrith. Sometimes the goblin is a light which issues from a person's mouth or nostrils. According to the belief of some sections, the size of the candle indicates the age of the person who is about to die, being large when it is a full-grown person whose death is foretold, small when it is a child, still smaller when an infant. Where two candles together are seen, one of which is large and the other small, it is a mother and child who are to die. When the flame is white, the doomed person is a woman; when red, a man. Part 2. Among the accounts of the corpse candle which have come under my notice, none are more interesting than those given me by a good dame whom I encountered at Caerau, near Cardiff. Caerau is a little village of perhaps 100 souls, crouched at the foot of a steep hill on whose summit are the ancient earthworks of a Roman camp. On this summit also stands the parish church, distinctly visible from Cardiff streets, so ponderous is its square tower against the sky. To walk there is a pleasant stroll from the late Marquis of Bute's statue in the centre of the seaport town. I am thus particular merely for emphasis of the fact that this superstition is not confined to remote and out-of-the-way districts. Caerau is rural, and its people are all poor people, perhaps, but its church is barely 3 miles from the heart of a busy seaport. In this church I met the voluble Welshwoman who gave me the accounts referred to. One was to this effect. One night her sister was lying very ill at the narrator's house, and she was alone with her children, her husband being in the lunatic asylum at Cardiff. She had just put the children to bed, and had set her candle on the floor preparatory to going to bed herself, when there came a swish along the floor, like the rustling of grave-clothes, and the candle was blown out. The room, however, to her surprise, remained glowing with a feeble light as from a very small taper, and looking behind her, she beheld old John Richards, who had been dead 10 years. He held a corpse candle in his hand, and he looked at her in a chill and steadfast manner which caused the blood to run cold in her veins. She turned and woke her eldest boy, and said to him, "Don't you see old John Richards?" The boy asked, "Where?" rubbing his eyes. She pointed out the ghost, and the boy was so frightened at sight of it that he cried out, "Ohé! Oh do! I wish I may die!" The ghost then disappeared, the corpse candle in its hand. The candle on the floor burned again with a clear light, and the next day the sick sister died. Another account ran somewhat thus. The narrator's mother-in-law was ill with a cancer of the breast. "Jennifer," she said to the narrator one night, "sleep by me. I feel afraid." "Ah!" said Jenny, thinking the old woman was foolishly nervous. But she stayed. As she was lying in bed by the side of her mother-in-law, she saw at the foot of the bed the faint flame of a corpse candle, which shed no light at all about the room. The place remained as dark as it was before. She looked at it in a sort of stupor for a short time, and then raised herself slowly up in bed, and reached out to see if she could grasp the candle. Her fingers touched it, but it immediately went out in a little shower of pale sparkles that fell downward. At that moment her mother-in-law uttered a groan and expired. "Do you know Thomas Matthews, sir?" she asked me. "He lives at Crwys, but he used to live here at Caerau." "Crwys?" I repeated, not at once comprehending. "Oh, you must know Crwys, sir. It is just the other side of Cardiff, towards Newport." "Can you spell it for me?" The woman blushed. "'Deed, sir," said she, "I ought to be a scholar, but I've had so much trouble with my old man that I've quite forgot my spelling." However, the story of Thomas Matthews was to the effect that he saw a corpse candle come out of his father's mouth and go to his feet, and away a bit, then back again to the mouth, which it did not exactly enter, but blended as it were with the sick man's body. I asked if the candle was tallow at any point in its excursion, to which I was gravely answered that it was the spirit of tallow. The man died not long after, in the presence of my informant, who described the incident with a dramatic force and fervour peculiarly Celtic, concluding with the remark, "Well, well, there's only one way to come into the world, but there's a many ways to go out of it." The light issuing from the mouth is a fancy frequently encountered. In the Liber Landavensis it is mentioned that one day as St. Sampson was celebrating the holy mysteries, St. Dubricius with 2 monks saw a stream of fire to proceed glittering from his mouth. In old woodcuts, the souls of the dying are represented as issuing from the mouth in the form of small human figures. And the Tyrolese peasants still fancy the soul is seen coming out of the mouth of a dying man like a little white cloud. From the mouth of a patient in a London hospital some time since, the nurses observed issuing a pale bluish flame, and soon after the man died. The frightened nurses, not being acquainted with the corpse candle theory of such things, imagined the torments of hell had already begun in the still living body. A scientific explanation of the phenomenon ascribed it to phosphuretted hydrogen, a result of incipient decomposition. III. It is ill jesting with the corpse candle. Persons who have endeavoured to stop it on its way have come severely to grief thereby. Many have been struck down where they stood, in punishment of their audacity, as in the case of William John, a blacksmith of Llanboidy. He was one night going home on horseback, when he saw a corpse candle, and his natural caution being at the moment somewhat overcome by potables, he resolved to go out of his way to obstruct its passage. As the candle drew near, he saw a corpse upon a bier, the corpse of a woman he knew, and she held the candle between her forefingers, and dreadfully grinned at him. Then he was struck from his horse, and lay in the road a long time insensible, and was ill for weeks thereafter. Meantime the woman whose spectral corpse he had seen died and was buried, her funeral passing by that road. A clergyman's son in Carmarthenshire, subsequently himself a preacher, who in his younger days was somewhat vicious, came home one night late from a debauch, and found the doors locked. Fearing to disturb the folk, and fearing also their reproaches and chidings for his staying out so late, as many a young fellow has felt before and since, He went to the manservant who slept in an out-room, as is sometimes the custom in Welsh rural districts. He could not awake the manservant, but while standing over him he saw a small light issue from the servant's nostrils, which soon became a corpse candle. He followed it out. It came to a footbridge which crossed a rivulet. Here the young man became inspired with the idea of trying an experiment with the corpse candle. He raised the end of the footbridge off the bank and watched to see what the ghost light would do. When it came to the rivulet it seemed to offer to go over, but hesitated, as if loath to cross except upon the bridge. So the young man put the bridge back in its place, and stayed to see how the candle would act. It came on the bridge, and as it passed the young man, it struck him, as with a handkerchief. But though the blow was thus light and phantom-like, it doubled the young man up, and left him a senseless heap on the ground, where he lay till morning, when he recovered and went home. It is needless to add that the servant died. IV. Maurice Griffith was once schoolmaster in the parish of Pontfaen, in Pembrokeshire, but subsequently became a Baptist preacher of the gospel. He tells this story: "As I was coming from a place called Tredavid, and was come to the top of the hill, I saw a great light down in the valley, which I wondered at, for I could not imagine what it meant. But it came to my mind that it was a light before a burying, though I could never believe before that there was such a thing. The light which I saw then was a very red light, and it stood still for about a quarter of an hour in the way which went towards Llanferchlodog church. I made haste to the other side of the hill that I might see it farther, and from thence I saw it go along to the churchyard, where it stood still for a little time, and entered into the church. I remained waiting to see it come out, and it was not long before it came out, and went to a certain part of the churchyard, where it stood a little time, and then vanished out of my sight. A few days afterwards, being in school with the children about noon, I heard a great noise overhead, as if the top of the house was coming down. I ran out to see the garret, and there was nothing amiss. A few days afterwards, Mr. Higgin of Pontfaen's son died. When the carpenter came to fetch the boards to make the coffin, which were in the garret, he made exactly such a stir in handling the boards in the garret as was made before by some spirit, who foreknew the death that was soon to come to pass. In carrying the body to the grave, the burying stood where the light had stood for about a quarter of an hour, because there was some water crossing the way, and the people could not go over it without wetting their feet, therefore they were obliged to wait till those that had boots helped them over. The child was buried in that very spot of ground in the churchyard where I saw the light stop after it came out of the church. This is what I can boldly testify, having seen and heard what I relate, a thing which before I could not believe." Joshua Coslet, before mentioned in these pages, suddenly met a corpse candle as he was going through Halbwlch Gynt, Windgap Lane, in Llandilo Fawr parish. It was a small light when near him, but increased as it went farther from him. He could easily see that there was some dark shadow passing along with the candle, and the shadow of a man carried it, holding it between his 3 forefingers over against his face. He might perhaps have seen more, but he was afraid to look too earnestly upon it. Not long after, a burying passed through Halbwlch Gynt. Another time he saw the likeness of a candle carried in a skull. There is nothing unlikely or unreasonable in either of these representations, says the Prophet Jones, their historian. A Carmarthenshire tradition relates that one day, when the coach which runs between Llandilo and Carmarthen was passing by Golden Grove, the property of the Earl of Cawdor, 3 corpse candles were observed on the surface of the water gliding down the stream which runs near the road. All the passengers saw them. A few days after, some men were about crossing the river near there in a coracle, when one of them expressed his fear at venturing, as the river was flooded, and he remained behind. Thus the fatal number crossed the river, 3 corpse candles having foretold their fate, and all were drowned. V. Tradition ascribes the origin of all these death portents to the efforts of St. David. This saint appears to have been a great and good man, and a zealous Catholic, who, as a contemporary of the historical Arthur, is far enough back in the dim past to meet the views of romantic minds. As a prelate, who by his prayers and presence could enable King Arthur to overthrow the Saxons in battle, or who by his pious learning could single-handed put down the Pelagian heresy in the Cardiganshire Synod, was surely strong enough to invoke the Gwrach Rhibyn, the Cyhyraeth, the corpse candle, and all the dreadful brood. This the legend relates he did by a special appeal to heaven. Observing that the people in general were careless of the life to come, and could not be brought to mind it, and make preparation for it, St. David prayed that heaven would give a sign of the immortality of the soul, and of a life to come, by the presage of death. Since that day, Wales, and particularly that part of Wales included in the bishopric of St. David, has had these phantoms. More materialistic minds consider these portents to be a remainder of those practices by which the persecuted Druids performed their rites and long kept up their religion in the land which Christianity had claimed. A similar origin, in fact, is here found for goblin omens as for fairies. That these various portents are extensively believed in at the present day there cannot be a doubt. With regard to the most important of them, I am able to testify with the fullest freedom. I have heard regarding them story after story from the lips of narrators whose sincerity was expressed vividly in face, tones, and behaviour. The excited eye, the paling cheek, the bated breath, the sinking voice, the intense and absorbed manner, familiar phenomena in every circle where ghost stories are told, evidenced the perfect sincerity, at least, of the speakers. It is unnecessary here to repeat what I for my own part never forget, nor, I trust, does the reader, that Wales is no exception to the rest of the world in its credulity. That it is more picturesque is true, and it is also true that there is here an unusual amount of legend, which has not hitherto found its way into books. Death omens are common to all lands. Even in America there are tales of the banshee, imported from Ireland along with the sons of that soil. In one recent case which came under my notice, the banshee belonged to a Cambridgeshire Englishman. This was at Evansville, Indiana, and the banshee had appeared before the deaths of 5 members of a family, the last of whom was the father. His name was Feast, and the circumstances attending the banshee's visits were gravely described in a local journal as a matter of news. Less distinguished death portents are common enough in the United States. That the Cambrian portents are so picturesque and clearly defined must be considered strong testimony to the vivid imagination of the Welsh. Figures born of the fancy, as distinguished from creatures born of the flesh, prove their parentage by the vagueness of their outlines. The outlines of the Cyhyraeth and the Gwrach Rhibyn sometimes run into and mingle with each other, and so do those of the Tolaeth and the Goblin Funeral, but the wonder is they are such distinct entities as they are. Part 6. To say that all the visible inhabitants of the mundane spirit world are creatures of the disordered human liver is perhaps a needless harshness of statement. The question of future life is not involved in this subject, nor raised by the best writers who are studying it. But religious belief quite apart, it remains to be proved that spirits of a supernatural world have any share in the affairs of a world governed by natural law. A goblin which manifests itself to the human eye, it seems to me, becomes natural, by bowing before the natural laws which rule in optics. Yet believers in ghosts find no difficulty in this direction. The word supernatural covers a multitude of sins. What is the supernatural? Asked Disraeli in Lothair. Can there be anything more miraculous than the existence of man and the world? Anything more literally supernatural than the origin of things? Surely in this life, nothing. The student who endeavours to govern his faith by the methods of science asks no more of any ghost that ever walked the earth, than that it will prove itself a reality. Man loves the marvellous. The marvels of science, however, do not melt away into thin air on close examination. They thrive under the severest tests, and grow more and more extraordinary the more they are tried. The spectroscope and the radiometer are more wonderful than any supernatural thing yet heard of. Transportation through the air in the arms of a spirit is a clear impossibility, but it is less wonderful than the everyday feats of electricity in our time, the bare conception of which would have filled Plato and Aristotle with awe. The actual origin of the phantoms of the spirit world is to be found in the lawless and luxuriant fancy of primeval man. The creatures of this fancy have been perpetuated throughout all time unto our own day by that passionate yearning in men for continued life and love which is ineradicable in our nature. Men will not, they cannot, accept the doubt which plunges an eternal future into eternal darkness, and separates them for ever from the creatures of their love. Hence, when the remorseless fact of death removes those creatures, they look, with a longing which is indescribably pathetic, into the unknown where their beloved have gone, and strive to see them in their spirit life. On this verge the finite mind must pause. To question that life is to add a terrible burden to all human woe. It need not be questioned, but to question the power of anything in that life to manifest itself to man through natural law is to do what science has a right to do. The living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more a portion for ever in anything that is done under the sun. End of Book 2, Chapter 9.